Welcome to episode 24 of The Pulpiteer. I'm your host, Eric Hepburn, and I'm glad to have you join us for today's episode. Today's podcast is entitled The Spyglass. This week is part live recording, and it is the second in my mythology series that comes from the work of Dr. Martin Shaw. Today's myth is called The Spyglass, and it comes from his book Smokehole. I'll start by reading you the story, and then we'll transition to the live recording of this week's message. The Spyglass by Martin Shaw. There was once a poor hunter who lived with his mother in the mountains. Luckily, he had uncanny skill with a bow, and most of the time they ate well, and their life had a sweetness to it. They made much from what some may regard as little. But there was a day when nothing came to the hunter. No animal laid down its life. So after a few hours he was growing despondent. He didn't like to see his mother without a hearty bowl of stew in front of her and a warming fire. Suddenly he came across an eagle resting on a rock, resplendent. In a flash he had his arrow out of his quiver and at his bow. But the eagle spoke in the high and powerful way that eagles do. "Spare my life, and I will be useful to you. I will give you a feather from my tail, and if you ever need help, burn it, and I will come to you." An ally like that seemed far more useful than one night's meal, so he accepted the arrangement and walked on. Soon he came to a goat and prepared to catch it. But the goat spoke in the trilling vibrato that goats have. "Spare my life, and I will be useful to you. I will give you a hair from my beard, and if you ever need help, burn it, and I will come to you." The hunter was quick to realize he was collecting allies, not grub, and accepted the arrangement. But his gut ached, and he worried about his mother. It was now dark, so he crawled into a hollow tree and spent the night. Deep and strange his dreams. In the morning, he walked a long stretch to the sea, hoping for a fish. He waded out into the gray waves, managing to catch a fish that glistened exactly like gold. As he wrenched the fish out of the brine, it spoke, in the gurgling and watery way that fish do. "Spare my life, and I will be useful to you. I will give you a golden scale from my skin, and if you ever need help, burn it, and I will come to you." Though wobbly with fatigue, the hunter recognized that something startling was happening, and he placed the fish back into the salty swirl and accepted the scale. Shivering and running up and down the beach to dry off, he spotted a red fox just up the shore, and again he creaked back his bow, though now half expecting the next scene, as the fox spoke in the amused and cackling way that foxes do. "Spare my life, and I will be useful to you. I will give you some fur from my tail, and if you ever need help, burn it, and I will come to you." So tired he could only nod, the hunter accepted the fur, and the fox darted off into the brush. For the rest of the day, the hunter walked. No birds, no animals, gray skies chill under his cloak. He came to a settlement and visited a little hut on its edge, smoke rising from the chimney. Inside was the smallest, oldest woman he had ever seen. Wrinkled like a currant she was, squatted down by the fire, stroking her belly, gazing up and clearly hungry. The hunter immediately reached into his pocket and gave her a coin. A smile spread across the moon of her face as she scuttled off to buy some meat. Later, they ate well, and the hunter felt finally refreshed. But he could feel the old woman was disguising some sorrow, so he inquired. At first, she didn't want to disturb his eating, but after some gentle nudging, she spoke to her distress, let it hover in the air between them. She told him the kingdom had a harsh ruler with many magics, that he had an odd entrancement on his daughter, that he had given her a spyglass that could see every single thing in the world. With this device, you could receive information in a fraction of a second. Any man who would want to marry her had to be nimble enough to evade her sight 3 times. You showed your pedigree by disappearing, by becoming nothing. Next to impossible for any suitor with the spyglass at her disposal. Any man who failed was slaughtered. So far, 99 young men had died, including both the old woman's sons, her winners of bread, her right arm, her sustenance. Of course, the next day the hunter made his way to the ruler's compound. He was astonished at its opulence, the servants, the gathered wealth. He said he accepted the challenge, but on one condition, that he was allowed to hide not 3 times, but 4. It's something to negotiate under that kind of pressure, but the daughter accepted, whilst reminding him, "Your head is hanging by a thread." Next morning, when the sun had barely opened his great hot eye, the hunter slipped away from the compound and burnt the eagle feather. Instantly, the eagle was there, picked him up, and carried the hunter to his nest, high above the cloud line. He then spent the day covering the hunter with his wings. Well, it was a hard thing for the daughter to locate. She worked over all the usual spots men hid in, and he wasn't there. Not down a well, in the tavern, under his mother's apron, or in an empty promise. Not even in a hollow tree. Finally, she spotted just a couple of hairs from the fur brim of his hat under the eagle's wing and shouted, "I found him! He did better than the rest, but I found him!" Next morning, when the sun was just starting to stir and contemplate the day's labors, the hunter slipped away from the compound and burnt the hair from the goat's beard. Instantly the goat was there, and the wild old thing carried the hunter to the very edge of the known and unknown world, dug a hole, nudged him in, and spent the day covering the hole with her furry, ample body. Well, it was a hard thing for the daughter to locate. She had almost given up, almost started to gaze up behind the planets, when she spotted a little cloth from his jacket under the girth of the goat's belly and shouted, "I found him! He did better than the rest, but I found him!" Next morning, when the sun was stifling a yawn and assembling its rays, the hunter slipped away from the compound and burnt the golden scale of the fish. Instantly the fish was there, and the sea spirit placed the hunter in the mouth of a pike and took him far out over the green daggers of the sea, then deep down into its depths. Well, it was a hard thing for the daughter to locate. She gazed on desert, swamp, forest, and meadow, and he was simply gone. She despaired until her mother prompted her to scan the deep sea. After some hours, she saw the pike open its mouth to swallow a fish, and she saw, tucked down inside, the face of the hunter and shouted, "I found him! He did better than the rest, but I found him!" There was excitement in the chief's compound now as they felt the trap tightening, but also some barely whispered admiration for how far the hunter had managed to stretch the affair, his skills under pressure. Next morning, when the sun was deciding to place one warm finger slow and curly over the top of the eastern hills, the hunter slipped away from the compound and burnt the fox's fur. Instantly the fox was there and told him to relax, take a nap under a tree, that he'd fix everything. The fox then dug an underground tunnel to right underneath the daughter's chambers, halting just a few feet under her. Try as she might, wherever she aimed her spyglass, she couldn't find the hunter. Never would she think to look under her own feet. That night when they met, she was so exasperated she asked for an extra day to locate him. With an easy smile, he agreed, and the next morning burrowed along the tunnel again, and again spent the day right under her feet. As dusk came, in frustration, she flung the spyglass against the wall, and suddenly a familial darkness flew out the window with it. Some healing had come. Overnight, her father slinked away into the forest, and the hunter became the husband of the princess of the kingdom. It was a merry time, and the hunter's mother was called over to the wedding. She danced for 3 hours with a man called Habib. Contentment, for just as long as is proper, ruled the house. Now we're going to transition to the live recording, starting with a reading from Smokehole, delivered by Beth Gehrman.
A people tyrannized by a magical spyglass. In the midst of what feels like a very, very old story, we have an advanced technology. Whilst the hunter is muttering with goats, the daughter of the ruler can see everything in the world instantly. Everything is available to her. If ever an image in an old tale spoke to me of right now, and you, of that I am certain, then this is it. There it is, right there. The shocking magic of the internet and technology, like that, is always going to appear as if it's magic. That's part of its stun value, the spyglass. In our cultural seizure of attention-grabbing madness, we'd hardly be difficult to spot. A second of scanning any number of social media devices, and there we are, practically with a zip code tattooed across our face. And of course, we have Google Earth for that, if needs be. What's so extraordinary is not that you can be located on such a device, but that the very conditions that make you a sovereign are that you have to prove yourself invisible to it. You have to conquer it. Could we do that? We can barely put our phones on the table, let alone make them disappear. This mind-boggling feat for the hunter is not easy. And if the hunter hadn't had the chutzpah to negotiate 4, not 3 tries, it would not have ended well for him. 4 breaks the arrow tip of 3. Possesses a differing strength. It changes the dynamic that's proved so lethal for the people. If you ever find yourself the underdog, if you can change just one little itty-bitty detail of the negotiation, then you may have the room for a divine wind to enter. Try it.
The very conditions that make you a sovereign are that you have to prove yourself invisible to it. Maybe even deaf to it. What does that mean, sovereignty? In another section of Dr. Martin Shaw's book, outside where he discusses the story, he says, if you're not terrified about what's going on with AI, then you're really not paying attention to the moment that we're in. And I hear that a lot these days. And people wonder, where is my sovereignty? Where is my agency in all of this? So, let's talk about the other side of the AI coin, the side that we don't talk about. We are training the AI. I want you to hear that again. We are training the AI. We are telling it what we think is important by giving our attention. Four breaks the arrow tip of 3. If you can find the chutzpah to renegotiate your terms, you can reclaim your agency. It's a slightly older aphorism, but we've all heard, if it bleeds, it leads. But we have comforted ourselves with the accusing finger pointing at the media, that it's their fault. What are they responding to? The same thing that the AI is responding to. They're responding to the thing that actually gets your attention. This isn't a them problem. This is an us problem. Have you been lured down the rabbit hole by fear and anxiety lately? Every second you spend scanning that screen of unhealthy nonsense, you feed the algorithm the thing that makes the algorithm. Your key power is to say no to that salacious stuff out there that you know is doing nobody any good. That is your moment of agency. Go walk away and mutter with the goats. Meditate under a tree. Read a book that feeds your soul instead of doom scrolling the latest apocrypha about the latest polls. Your ability to find your own center, to sit in the world granting attention only to the things that are worthy of it, might just be infectious. Might just be the thing that tips your neighbor into a calmer, cleaner, more connected, more centered space where they can make a choice that resonates with their hearts and all of our well-being instead of doubling down on their fears. I know it doesn't sound like much, but if you're taking my words seriously this morning, you can already feel how hard such a shift would be. How easy it is for the salience of negative energy to suck you into that vortex, feeling like if you're not out of your skin with anxiety in this moment, it's because you're not paying attention. I'm going to give you a counter narrative to that. If all you're feeling these days is anxiety, it is because you are putting your attention in the wrong place. Anybody here make their best decisions when they're terrified? Anybody? I have not found that to be true in my life. I have not found it to be true, and it was one of the earliest lessons that I tried to teach my son. When we are in fear and anxiety, we make bad choices. And yet, like me, you probably have several dozen or several hundred texts on your phone in the last 48 to 72 hours that are pouring fuel on only one thing: your fear and anxiety. It is a great disappointment to me that I don't see more wisdom in it. I don't see more wisdom. I don't see the wisdom we need to lead us out of this moment showing up in those texts. I see only, if we can make the flames a little higher, maybe they'll see the smoke. As Gandhi said, an eye for an eye, leaving the whole world blind, burning down the earth, trying to save it. I know it's hard. I can't say I'm personally doing that well at it. I've found myself wanting to fall into some dark habits lately as a reprieve and escape from the incessant anxiety and fear of this moment. But as I've been imploring you all means y'all, or y'all means all. I still don't know. But if we cut off other human beings, no matter who they are, from our compassion, from our desire for good and health for them, then we are feeding the AI the things we fear most. We're producing the situation we want to avoid. There's a great aphorism, but I can't call it to mind. It's something about you find the devil you tried to avoid on the road you took to avoid them. It's not new for human beings, this struggle. What is new is the number of amplifiers that are out there. I took my son to an air show yesterday, something that I hadn't done since I was about his age, an early teenager. What was interesting to me was how much he knew about all the different planes. Information that at his age, I would have had to go to the library every day after school for months to know what he knows about those airplanes. That's the magic of the internet too. It's not all bad. It's not all things to be afraid of. I've heard people speculate that, and I think Martin Shaw does this in his book as well, speculates that, the human brain is just not equipped for all this. Not equipped for this ramping up of technology, for the fire hose of information that we're being fed on a daily basis. And I don't like disagreeing with Martin Shaw. He's a brilliant guy, but I disagree with him on this point. It's not our brains that are behind. It's our intentional cultivation of wisdom within and among each other. That's what's lagging behind. There's a beautiful story, if you like long books that involve both trees and the internet. It's called The Overstory by Richard Powers. It's a great book. It has a different take on what AI might be capable of that is worth reading. Because you see, if we had the wisdom to give AI directives, and if the things we gave our attention to every day were also wise, it might be one heck of an ally. But it's learning from us, and we're not spending enough time learning from each other. We spend our time scrambling and attention grabbed by stuff that we know is not worthy. And we do it out of fear, and we do it out of anxiety. And we do it because it's easier to look at everybody else's trauma than to sit down and be with and start to heal our own. It's a great line from Eckhart Tolle. He says, when you run into someone in your life who really gets under your skin, you know those people. When you run into that, the reason that it's so triggering for you is because that thing that you see in them is the part of yourself you've tried to disown. What you see in them is that part of yourself you have tried to disown. So like so many things that we've talked about, if you could take that moment as an invitation not to put that person on your own personal blacklist, but to ask, what is this mirror that is being held up to me in this moment? What is this invitation to do my own hard work in this life that's being held up in this moment? I wouldn't be up here if I didn't think it was possible. But I do. And when I stand face to face with another human being, even those who have done harm, even those who continue to do harm, I can connect with them as a human being. And I would say that it gives me hope. But hope, as Stephen Jenkinson says, is a mortgage on the future. What it gives me is faith. And I don't mean faith in a particular string of words and symbols. I mean faith that we all really are doing our best, and that we just simply need one another. We simply need one another. And if the AI is going to get wise, it needs all of us. Four breaks the arrow tip of 3. So, one more short thing. People tend to be led from the head, the heart, or the gut. This is something, it's part of Enneagram work, it's part of a bunch of different traditions, but people tend to have a go-to. It will not surprise you that this is my go-to. I'm a head guy. I'm a head guy who in the latter half of life is learning how to not put my heart under a lid in the basement, but to let the feelings part of life be out there. But that's only possible if you break the arrow tip of 3. So 3 is head, heart, and gut. Thinking, feeling, intuiting. That's the 3. The 4th is what I call spirit, although I really don't care what you call it. If that word doesn't work for you, pick a different one. It's all good to me. But the development through meditation, through prayer, through music, through other things that get us fully in touch with ourselves. That is the emergence of spirit, and with that, we can access all 3 of those sources of intelligence within us. Without it, we are stuck being lured by whatever bait the world throws out that makes the thinkers get up in their head, the feelers fall into the wet pit of their emotions, the gut people just can't stop doing stuff, just trying to fix everything, but not finding the time or space to reflect or to feel. In the next 2 weeks, you will need whatever spiritual practices you have developed. If you don't have any yet, it's not a great time to start, but you should anyway. When is the best time to plant a tree? A line from the overstory. When is the best time to plant a tree? 18 years ago. But now will do. Now will do if you haven't gone out into your garden and planted the seeds that you need. Now will do. I'm going to mess this up, but the Greeks are long dead, so they won't hold it against me. There is an aphorism in Greek mythology that says, the world will be where it needs to be when wise elders plant trees whose shade they will never know. When wise elders plant trees whose shade they will never know. That is my invitation to you all. Until next time, thank you for joining us on The Pulpiteer. The Pulpiteer podcast is a production of the San Gabriel Unitarian Universalist Fellowship of Georgetown, Texas. If you'd like to support the podcast, you can make a donation at sangabrieluu.org/give. The podcast is hosted by Spotify, and theme music is by John Faber. This week's reading was courtesy of Beth Gehrman. Our live recording tech crew is Frank Sanders, Rob Berthold, Keith Hutchinson, and Andrea McDaniel. Special thanks this week goes out to Dr. Martin Shaw and the folks at Chelsea Green Publishing. The podcast is produced and performed by Eric Hepburn. See you next week.